It's a joy to be with you again. This week we're going to look at the question, what does it mean that death entered the world as recorded in Romans 5? And also, what does it mean that Jesus conquered death as explained in Hebrews 2? Those two questions. Now, we've in the series, the inverted series that there's 9 previous videos to this one. We explored alternative ways of looking at the Genesis texts. And I'm not going to, summarize all of those series, but I just want to bring your attention to one conclusion that we came to, which really stirred and is the basis of this question. The conclusion we came to is that these origin stories were never meant to be historical accounts. They are stories that explores what it means to be human. They are stories that explore who God is, how we relate to Him. They are theological in their intention. But many of us have grown up in faith communities in which these texts were interpreted as literal and historic. Now, when we come to the conclusion that that was not the intention of the authors, that these aren't actual historic events, that does open up a whole lot of new questions, very interesting questions. And it's on that basis that this question was stirred, because in that old way of thinking, there really was a time in which there was a perfect world in which there was no death. And what we meant by no death is no physical, no biological death. Well, everything we know scientifically of this world, everything we know from observing reality, tells us that life, biological life, is impossible without death. It is the death of bacteria within our soil that produces the nutrients for plants to live. It is the death of plants that is necessary for the bacteria, for other plants, and for animals to live. It's the death of some animals that allows other animals to live. In fact, it is our sun dying, and a small percentage of its death reaches the earth. You see, the sun spewing out light it does it because it's in the process of dying. And this light that reaches earth is what makes life on our planet possible. So everything we know about death and life tells us that they are absolutely necessary for one another. There would be no life without death. But contrary to all of reality, we sometimes hold to a certain interpretation of these stories because, frankly, that interpretation is what helps us make sense of the world. And no matter what other data we are given, we often want to hold to it. Now, I'm talking to those of you who are willing to consider other options, who are willing to look at reality and say maybe there's some truth to be communicated in the reality of how this world works. Because if we believe that there once was a time in which death, biological death, was not a part of our world, it also then stirs the very unrealistic expectation that somehow I can once again attain this kind of immortality, this kind of living forever physically. And there are precious friends of ours and groups and faith communities throughout the world who are trying to again somehow claim, based on the interpretation of Genesis, that immortality, this ability to live forever physically, is a real possibility. So let me be as plain and as clear as I can be. There has never been one human being who has lived forever physically. Even Jesus himself died physically. And he conquered death not by avoiding death, but exactly through death. So, what is an alternative way of interpreting this text that says death entered our world and that Jesus conquered this death? And by no means do I claim that this explanation is exhaustive or complete. It is just to give you a taster that there are theologically sound ways and alternative ways of interpreting this text without putting completely unscientific, contrary to all reality interpretations on them. So what could this mean that they've entered? Now, I grew up next to a beautiful nature reserve here in South Africa, the Kruger National Park. And there were a few times where we observed lions or leopards stalking their prey and actually catching one of these backs. In one of these instances, a back was caught and it actually lost consciousness, I think just because of the adrenaline and the excitement of the chase. As the leopard caught it, it just went limp. The leopard kind of lost interest and started looking around. And during that time, the little buck regained consciousness, kind of shook. It's its way of getting rid of all the adrenaline. It shook itself, all the adrenaline off, and then just took off and ran and actually escaped the leopard. And most of these animals, they do not live in the wherever they are in the development of their consciousness. They know that there are dangers around, but they do not live in a constant anxiety and expectation of death. When the chase is on, when the danger is there, the adrenaline kicks in, they run, they try to escape. But when the chase is over, when the danger is gone, they go back to eating and drinking and enjoying their existence. And a few of the animals will be on the lookout for predators, but there's not this constant consciousness of death is about to fall upon us. Now, somewhere within the development of human consciousness, our ability to perceive time, to perceive cause and effect, to tell a story, to put our life events into a sequence, to know where we've come from, how it has affected our present and where we're going. That development in our consciousness brought us to the place where we could calculate that despite all the things that could happen in my life, the inevitable conclusion of every human being is death. And so a consciousness of death entered humanity. And Hebrews beautifully explains that this became the fear of death. Humans, more than any other creature, has a consciousness of the brevity, of the temporality, of the inevitability of death in life. And the negative effect of that has been that we've lived to preserve. We've become slaves of this fear that we want to preserve our existence, preserve our life. And we start living for ourselves. It manifests in many different ways. And this is where Hebrews 2 is so beautiful. Because Jesus, let me read this for you. This is Hebrews 2, verse 14 and 15, and this is David Bentley Hart's translation. Inasmuch, therefore, as the children have blood and flesh in common, he too, Jesus too, shared in these same things, so that by death he might render the one holding the power of death, that is the slanderer, ineffectual, and might liberate those who had all their lives been bound in slavery to the fear of death. And so this beautifully explains that the way in which Jesus conquered death is not so that everyone that believes in him will physically never die, because there have been millions of people who have believed in Christ and millions who died physically. But rather he transforms our relationship to this reality from one of fear, because you see the inevitability of death can have two effects. Either it causes us to become small in our way of living, to become just occupied with preserving life, or alternatively, and this is, I think, what Jesus opens up for us, the reality of death means that I am now grateful for every moment, because every moment is a gift. Every minute is a gift. So gratitude instead of fear now becomes the content and my experience of the moment, that life is a gift. So Jesus indeed conquers death because we no longer need to fear it. He experiences the most violent, the most brutal death imaginable, and shows us by facing our greatest fear that not even that is something that can separate us from the love of our Creator, of our Abba. So that's just one way, just one alternative way of understanding that death entered human consciousness. Instead of us thinking of there was a time when there was no biological death and then things started dying, which is contrary to everything we can observe in reality, I think it makes a lot of sense to say within the development of human consciousness there came a time where the reality of death became part of our awareness. And if it affects us in such a way that we start living out of fear, that environment of fear creates a lot of evil, a lot of sin. But if we heed the words of Jesus and the life of Jesus and allows his message to affect us, the reality of death is no longer a source of fear, but it's a source of gratitude for the givenness of this moment, for the givenness of this day. Thank you. Next time we'll touch on another one of your very interesting questions. Thanks. Bye.